Welcome to Playful Beginnings, a podcast about the magic of play therapy for therapists, students, and anyone interested. In our podcast, we'll explore the deeper understanding of play therapy and the skills we use when working with children.
We hope to help you understand the why behind what we do and how it helps kids heal and grow. I'm Dr. Christy Opiola, a working play therapist and university professor in North Carolina.
I'm Dr. Maggie Parker, a play therapist and professor in DC. Well, hi, Dee. So excited to have you back.
Yeah.
Last time we were talking about really the neat experience that we get to have when we work with kids and being able to see them, and also how Christy and I felt that our experience at University of North Texas with you and Sue and Gary and everyone that we got to be around also provided that sense of safety and understanding. And so I'm interested if we can kind of like come back to that and that connection and acceptance that we talk about, that unconditional positive regard and kind of how that looks.
Yeah. And I think it's just so fully integrated in how I interact and see people.
Yeah, I love those moments with a client where they truly experience it for the first time too, right? Like there's something of us experience the depth of that relationship, but when I don't even know how to describe it. It's kind of like Maggie says, but it's like something happens in their eyes where they're like, okay, I can really be myself and I don't have to show up a certain way for my relationship, with Dee or Maggie or Christy. I just get to come and be authentically myself. Like I giggle because I have kids who literally like take their exterior personality off at the door. Like they come in, they take their shoes off, they take their socks off, they'll take their jacket if they have a sweatshirt on, and then they're like, I am here, like I am free to be and they take a deep breath and you're like, okay, we're ready. We're gonna tackle the things that you need to tackle today, not the pressure that mom talked about in the hallway. And I'm not taking you there. There's something special and sacred about that time with our clients.
Yeah, and you see it have it like a very concrete, like recently, I won't say when, but recently I was with a child and first session. And so when he comes in, he immediately looks at the crowns. So we have like tiaras and crown, king, more king-like crowns. And he looks at him and he's like, oh, and he says openly, boys can't play with those. And I'm like, oh, it just seems like, boys can't play with those things. He's like, yeah, boys can't wear crowns. And I'm like, oh, and he looked at him and looked at him and continues to explore the room. 20 minutes later, he comes back. And he's got all of them on his head. Like he's wearing the tiara, takes that off, wears the crown, like just all of it. And just seeing his, like something switched for him of, oh, okay, this is a place I don't have to follow the rules that I've internalized in my head, and I can just do what I need to do. And when you see that happen, then you're on your way, that they're experiencing there's a whole different thing happening here.
It's really, for those of you who may not have had that experience yet. I know we did a podcast on trusting the process, which I think we hear a lot and it can sometimes be really hard to do, but keep at it. Make sure you get good supervision from your supervisor about what might be going on in the session that might be limiting kids from really showing up in there and exploring and having freedom to be as they need to be in those moments in the room. Because I do think, not that that's what is convincing, but it really does shift what's happening in the room for the child and for you when you can see them exploring things that they thought maybe were unacceptable or they couldn't talk about. Or I know I've shared this story. I worked with a little girl who was adopted, transracially adopted, international adoption. And we happened to have some materials in the room that had representation from her home country. And I remember her sitting there and really kind of magically exploring what it means to be adopted into an American culture, but also holding authentically on to her birth culture. And like, she's like, I am this and I'm this. She did that back and forth, right? And reflecting, right? Both of those are true for you. It's confusing which one, because when she first put on something that represented her birth country, it was almost like it wasn't acceptable to do so.
Mhm.
And so like just hearing the acceptance, like, oh, you're not sure if that's okay. And here you can decide if you want to put that on, and really returning that to her. And then at the end, she put both the things that represented America and the things that represented her birth culture. And she's like, look, I'm both. And I was like,
Oh
yeah.
my God, that's
I mean, it
amazing.
was just like a magical
Yeah.
cultural moment. And then she was like, I want to go show my mom. And then, like
Mhm.
the part of me as being human and wanting to protect her, because I wasn't 100%
Um,
sure if the parent could be 100% accepting.
mhm.
And so then I was like, we could, like, okay,
Mhm.
can this be safe for you?
Yeah.
So you trying to make sense of both. Thankfully, mom was like, oh yeah. And then like
Mhm.
didn't really put much into it or read much out of it, but it was just kind of an interesting component in the session. But being able to explore and show up authentically was,
Well, and you trusting that she could do it, right? Like, because I think it would be tempting in that situation that you're sharing to, especially for those of us who have, like a commitment to diversity and affirming children's identities. It can be tempting for you to kind of go, or the therapist to kind of go in and say, oh, you can be proud of your home country. You can be really proud of that, and do a little kind of direct teaching of, and the therapist would have just missed the opportunity to allow this child to know she really needed to explore both sides of this and figure it out for herself. And us kind of coming in with our own value system, how much that is intrusive and interrupts the process.
yeah. Yeah, I didn't even think of that. I
Mhm.
think just in the moment I was
Sure.
mesmerized and like so in her state of like the curiosity about both of these, that it was easy to get engrossed in like what she was doing without me needing to show up or teach. But I know that comes up, don't get me wrong, it comes up in other ways in session, but in that moment it was just kind of like, wow, look at this. Yeah. One of the things we wanted to ask you, Dee, and we kind of alluded to it a little earlier, but are there things in your supervisees or students that you've worked with that kind of stand out to you about, this person, I'd like them to take play therapy or explore this avenue? Or are there things that happen that you're like, yeah, let's go the adult round. Let's go the other round. Like maybe child therapy is not for you. I just wonder like how I think both Maggie and I have been really touched by our experiences with you and feel really nurtured in our own journeys to get where we are. So I'm just wondering both as a university professor and supervisor, what is that you see in other people that help you encourage them on this journey?
I think it's a really hard question because to me it feels intuitive. Like I'll just have the feeling of, oh, that person. And as you ask the question, I think about each of you. Why now, Christy? When I met you, you were already, because we met when you were in group play therapy as a master's student.
I was struck
And so
by
you were already a play person. You'd already identified that. And then Maggie was not. It's the first year as the doctoral program. So I am thinking about just the two of you and my experiences with you. And they stand, and I can give you specifics. And I think that could go to a summarizing. But with Christy, I very much remember we had messed up on when we were offering group play. And what happened was it was a very large class with only three master students, two master
was
students.
it.
This is one of two master students, and the rest were doctoral students. And I remember from the very beginning going, oh, these poor master students. Like I feel so bad for them. How are they ever going to speak up? How are they ever going to get anything from this class? And I just remember you standing out, not talking too much or anything, but that you would ask questions or give experiences. And to me, and I'll talk about Maggie because it's a similar kind of thing. And then with Maggie, just always showing up as Maggie, like just like, I never was like, I wonder what she's thinking, or I wonder, I wonder if she's hiding herself, because even when she was presenting herself in a certain way, she would come back around and go, well, here's how I'm presenting myself. Like there's such honesty about it. And yeah, so many experiences around that. So to me, I think one of those is authentically showing up, because I know Christy and Maggie too, because you had some prior experiences that weren't great in education. And so I knew the bravery that it would take to speak up, to kind of show up authentically in that setting. And to see each of you do that, that to me is very much a match to child-centered play therapy, because it's going to be tough to be in spaces with children. It's going to be tough to always show up authentically when things are going on. And so I do think that is a primary one I'm looking for when I'm kind of seeing people grow in play therapy, is what is going on with their authenticity. And sadly, there are many people entering the field that isn't where they're at, like that it is for other, it's, lots of motivations that I'm not saying are bad motivations. They just don't fit really well, I think. And so that idea of I'm gonna be me even when it's hard to be me. And again, all of us are gonna have moments where we're not authentic, and this isn't a safe place to be authentic, so I'm going to stop being authentic, whatever that is. But being able to be like, no, 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 that to me stands out. The other thing is just for when I, can predict really well, like what's going on with play therapists, how well will they match profession, it is their desire. Like they want this, and not that they want it because they want to be the most important in a child's life, or they want to save children. I think for all of us, there's a little bit of that, but that's all it is I want to save children. I want to be the savior. When those people show up, it feels more like, oh, this is all for me, basically. And the difference is when I come across people who are like, no, I want to know more about this. And I'm hungry to know more about it. I don't think I have all the answers within me. I want to read, like, and people know me. I believe in reading. I really believe in reading. And I know that's a lost art in our education system right now. That I think we do need to read the people that came before us, and we need to read what their experience is, whether we agree with it or not now. And we learn from that, and then actual factual information. So and that's when I come across people who want to be play therapists, and they have that hunger to, I just want to know more. I want to know what people are, play therapists are thinking. I want to know what's been said. I want to know what's been written. To me, that is just a trajectory of success is going to happen. So those things I think are things that I really attune to. It's like, oh, I really think I know this person, not because I'm so great, but because they allow me to know them. And they really are hungry to know how to best serve children, and they're doing whatever it needs to be done to do that, including working on themselves. Because that openness, because to me that comes with authenticity, is when you realize, ooh, I've got some things I need to be working on, and then your willingness to go work on them. That's it, man. Like if you have those things, I think you are more child, because that's what children are, right? Children show up authentically, and even if they're trying to not be authentic, they're showing they're authentic because they're so vulnerable, and they're hungry for new experiences and for new things and to learn about the world. They're hungry for that. And so if the therapist matches in those characteristics, then I think they become a better match in play therapy. I don't know if that's everything, I think, but those are the essential ones, I think. I don't know. What do y'all think? I've done a lot with supervisees.
Oh no, I authentically, like as you were saying that, I'm like, oh gosh, I was so authentic. Like I'm like, I can't believe this is embarrassing to talk about. And then when you said bravery, I was like, oh, I think it's the ability to see the depth, I guess. And I think it's easy to discount certain things about people without exploring what is underneath that and what's going on. And I think we don't do a good job in society of allowing for authenticity and vulnerability. And I think that's often seen as weak, I guess. I don't know. And you saying it as brave, I was like, oh, wow.
That's so brave, right? Like it's just not rewarded at all. And when I say brave, I am not talking about bravado. It is bravery. Like some of the people that are so seen as unassuming that I think are just amazing play therapists, people who will cross the world to just learn more and move into cultures that they're completely unfamiliar with, and where they have no support, and they show up, and maybe they sit quietly through things, through when I'm talking about like US culture, we all love big displays of interaction, right? I've just seen so many great play therapists, and to me, I'm just right now they're just running through my mind of people I could tell you who are often seen by others as being unassuming and quiet, and they are the bravest people I know. And what motivated them is hunger for, I want to be a good play therapist. I want to serve children. And so, yeah. And so bravery shows up in a lot of different ways. And yeah, us being able to see it.
No, it's just a cool, I don't know, it's just a neat, sometimes it just feels kind of like what I was saying about with the child, right? Like you asked us what we see, and sometimes it's that desire for connection, or that you just kind of, you should take the play class.
Yeah.
Like, it's
Yeah.
hard to
It is.
find.
It's very intuitive. It's very much, oh, that's a play person.
Yeah.
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 And I would say that's a child-centered person. Like, because I think too, those are mixed up for me as far as, because I'm gonna be more intuitive toward people who I see as more person-centered. And so that's they're coming in. So yeah, whenever I see an adult counselor who's just a great person-centered counselor, I'm like, oh God. And really it's not always a match. They don't love being around children, and there is nothing wrong with that. But I'm always like, oh, I think they would be really good, but they just really don't want to do children.
Yeah.
So that's okay. We need our person-centered people just for adults too.
Yeah.
So true.
It's just a neat experience what we do.
It is.
And I feel really honored to be in the position I'm in at a university where you do kind of get to help people find their area of passion, if that's child-centered play therapy or if that's not, right? I always tell students, I'm not here to convince you to do this. This has to speak to you. If it doesn't speak to you, let's find what is your passionate area that really kind of blows your mind and makes you really excited to come into work every day.
That sometimes isn't counseling at all, right?
And correct, yes.
And that's okay.
And we're finding that more and more, I think, and it always makes me sad, graduate school is not inexpensive. And so I always hate when they're, halfway through a program or at the end of the program and they're like, and I don't even want to do this for a living. And I was like, I'm so proud of you to come to that decision. And I'm sorry it cost you so much money to come to that decision.
Yeah, and I think too, like the whole idea of what I was talking about, like becoming a counselor very young, how much life experience plays into what you want to do career-wise. And right now I think often young people are like, no, you got to do all of this right now, and you got to go through all the way through right now. And I think in counseling, especially, being able to take some time to see, is this really what you want to do? Is this a match for you? Because you're still a good person, even if you decide not to be a counselor. I think a lot of people struggle with that of like, oh, I must be a bad person because I'm not, I don't want to continue to work this way with people. I'm like, no, there's lots of wonderful ways to help people.
I also think a lot of people have been persuaded by what other people say are their strengths.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And recently have been the first few times that we've had students who went, who are graduating at 19 and 20 because they did advanced placement classes. So they're finished, right? And are exploring options. They haven't entered our program, but it's kind of like we're in a dilemma in our, like just thinking that through. Gosh, is this the right time for them to think? Do they need more growth experience? Do they need life experience outside of that? Just to know what, are we losing good people by putting limits on things? I don't know. There's so much that goes into that, but yeah, I think it's hard to be a counselor at 20, 21 years old.
Yeah. Well, and I think like one of the things, even like talking about being vulnerable and like thinking about my own students and supervisees, and like it's really hard for them. And I think it can be off-putting. And now that we're having this conversation, if you think about, this is the generation that grew up with Instagram and Facebook and likes and all of this stuff. And was any part of that genuine? And when they were allowed to be genuine, what was the backlash of being genuine, and how scary that must be to come into a classroom and have me sit there and be like, all right, let's do this. Right. I think that I haven't really thought about it from that perspective of how hard it must be, how guarded one must feel, or curated they feel like they need to present as, and how hard that would be to enter into a counseling profession, because you can't be curated like that.
Right. Well, you can, just probably not most effective in what you do. I think too, like to expand that to play therapists, because you're saying what people are told they're good at. Like, so, people will be attracted to play therapy because I like to play. I love to play, and I love to play with children, and I love children. And, when you're saying, what do you look for in people? That actually isn't something that I look for. I mean, obviously you need to have some kind of playful spirit as a play therapist, but that isn't what we do in terms of, so somebody who comes in and like, oh, play therapy, I can always do this activity and do this fun thing with children and make it fun. Like, then you're kind of missing it, because children are in pain and struggle.
Right.
And can you sit in their pain with them? Can you journey with them through their struggle? Can you do that? And I think that's where some play therapists
Yeah.
either end up not pursuing it, or go to, well, then I'll just be more attracted to, I'll continue to direct everything that happens in session. I'm not saying all directed play therapists are this way, but it is a safer place to be. If I set the agenda for the play therapy session, and I know exactly what we're doing, where we're going, then I don't have to sit with the pain, and I can keep it at the fun level. And to me, that's not a great match.
I think that's like one of the hardest things I hear is when they're like, oh, well, like the people be like, well, you're the fun professor, or I'm taking play because it's fun, or, and I'm like, this is actually one of the hardest classes that our students take. It's actually one that it tends to be a weeding, like where we're really starting to see like maybe this isn't the profession for you, because I personally think play therapy is the hardest to do. It's child-centered play, right? Like sitting with a child as they are processing such big, hard, terrible things that have happened in their lives, and to be fully present and open and engaged. It takes up all of my energy. We were talking about self-care, or we'll talk about self-care when it'll be released in a couple episodes, but like I have to take naps. It takes up so much energy for me. It really is hard to do, and I don't think sometimes people recognize that.
Yeah, and the amount of reflection that you need to engage in following each session, even if the session wasn't that hard, like the importance of you being able to stop and reflect. Again, so going back to, maybe I'll do an add-on to my list of people who are thoughtful. Like, I like let me step back and think about what's occurred here, what went on for me, what went on for the child, what went on between us. That's a huge piece of it, and that's a lot of work. And then a lot of people don't want to sit in reflection. And it is self-care, because even if it is related to the profession and working, it is how I maintain an ability to be excited about my profession, to know that I'm continually working toward getting better, is that I'm taking this time to reflect on what's occurred, even if it seems like that was a simple 45 minutes. Let me step back and see what's really happening.
Dee, it probably doesn't stand out to you, but I remember during my doctoral program, I was working with a client who really triggered me in session. And I remember coming into your office in tears. I mean, I was literally frozen in session, and she was really sharing how scary and how controlled and how limited she felt in school for her. And she was role playing it. I was playing the child in the classroom. She was playing the teacher, and all of my stuff came up. And I remember going into your office and just almost in shell shock, like I have no idea what just happened. I don't even remember part of the session. I think we watched back part of it because I didn't have and I was like, and we really kind of sat and processed through. I had lots to think about leaving, and like self-reflecting on like what about came up for me in that, to be in relationship for her, and like all of those components. But it really is, it's not a do and walk away,
Right.
right? It's what we do in the session is like half of what we do holistically as child-centered play therapists, I feel like, because we spend a lot of time reflecting outside, or processing, making sense of, because in the moment, I just want to be, I don't just is one of my pet peeve words. I really want to be with the child.
And not thinking about the child.
Yeah, not thinking about or conceptualizing them in the moment. So most of that happens for me, and I think for both of you as well, outside of the session time.
Yeah, a huge piece of it.
Yeah.
Okay, I have two silly questions, but I want to, like, we alluded to this one. First is, so often when I'm doing play therapy, my mind will wander and I have to like bring it back, right? Like focus. And sometimes I'll make reflections and you are often the voice in my head. And I'm like, oh, damn it, Dee would be so pissed at me. I'll be like, I cross my legs. Dee told me not to do that, but it's, like.
I do have those certain rules.
I know. And I'm like,
I'll admit it. I have some very specific rules.
Yeah, and I like still every time I'm in session, I'm like, oh, I'm crossing my legs, or whatever. And so I wondered if you had a voice in your head ever, and who was it?
Oh my God. Well, so I sound terrible if I say no, right?
No. I
I'm
think
trying to
this
think.
speaks also to my insecurities, right? Of like, I'm constantly critiquing myself. That's not like a
It's
bonus. Like,
very when I'm with people, when I'm with people, like especially one-on-one, two-on-one. I'm terrible in large groups, but but one-on-one and two-on-one, I am really present, and I'm not even sure I spend a lot of energy thinking about that. That's just, I don't know. I think just something about my personality that is just who I am. If you put me in a group of people, all I'm doing is thinking about, I'm so socially awkward. And with one or two, I very much just the rest of the world goes away, and it's just right there. So I wouldn't say that there's a voice in my head when I'm actually interacting, and I don't remember, I'm trying to be honest about it, but I don't remember that being early on either. Definitely afterward. Definitely for me, there was always Sue and Gary, like, and they're very different. And so it would be two different outcomes that I would come to when thinking about, oh, here's what Gary would
like
think.
one
And
on
he
each
thinks it's
shoulder.
okay. He wouldn't like it, but I think Sue would. And so I think definitely in that reflective time afterward, and working with my own self-doubts, that's where that would come in. But in the moment, it is very much for me that the whole other world disappears. I say this all the time, like, because I've worked with so many students. I don't know a lot of like concrete details about students, about like, it's hard for me to remember whether somebody's married or how many kids they have or their kids' names. But I can tell you they're what I call demons. I can tell you what they struggle with internally. I can tell you what really kind of triggers them, what they're working on, what their strengths are. I can give you that. And I think that is about, in those moments, those are real moments for me. And so I don't have a lot of interference in those moments.
Okay, the other question I have was, Christy and I were talking about something that you shared with us separately
Oh no.
in class, and we both had different takes on it. Potty training.
Oh,
So what is your
favorite
theory on
subject.
potty training? Because she and I, we both talked about how you talked about it, but then both of our like processes as to what it meant was very different.
Oh, fun. What part of it? What do you mean?
Well,
Was it during parent consultations that we were talking about potty
like
training?
what? Yeah.
That you like to ask about potty training, and we had different interpretations of why we ask about potty training.
Oh.
And like what it can share with us about, is that right, Meg? Like,
yeah.
Like
Yeah.
how that informs us
Okay.
when we ask that question.
So I don't know what y'all came to, but I'll just tell you, like, so potty training to me is the essential event that occurs for children, where it all just comes to a head about what is their personality and what is the relationship between parent and child, or caregiver and child. It is it's such a huge thing. Because everybody does it, we just don't think of it as important as it is. But it's the first time in a human life that they are going to start taking responsibility and autonomy over their own bodies. And potty training is it, right? It's the event where that really occurs, because the parent or the caregiver they can't actually make a child go or not go, right? So when a child enters potty training, that's where they're at. Like, I'm going to start making decisions about my own body. And so it tells you everything about their personality. And so when I ask about it in intake and ask parents about it, I get a really great sense of this child's personality. My child used to run off and go try to use the potty on their own. They didn't want us to know anything about it. Okay, so your child is fairly autonomous and wants to do things and independent on their own. Okay, got that. My child, I had to go every single time. We had to sit and hold hands. We had to sit there for an hour. They asked if they did it right. Okay, so I'm getting a sense of your child really needs a lot of support, and your child might be very externally focused and might be struggling a little bit with anxiety, right? So, and then you hear the parent or caregiver talk about it. And it was just a huge waste of time. And I had to sit there and hold her hand, and I had 100 things to do. Okay, all right. So now we're getting a sense of the parent-child relationship and how you responded. Or, I had to go follow him because he would just go off by himself, and he needed me there because otherwise he was just going to make a mess. And I'm like, okay, so now we're getting a sense of the control needs you have in your parent-child relationship. So it just gives you like this huge well of information that you could ask 100 different questions and not get as much information as you can get when you ask about potty training. So is that what y'all came to? Like, what did y'all?
So I spoke to the personality piece. I was like, it
Oh,
tells you the personality. And Christy spoke to the attachment. And so we were both
um,
right.
yes, you're both right.
We were halfway. We were
So that's
halfway
funny.
there.
And I think that's funny because that really reflects your personalities too, right? Like you said, because Chrissy's very focused on that attachment stuff. And then Maggie, you are like, what is, yeah, it just really speaks to the two of you. Like, I think that's funny. And again, how each human hears, according to our own lenses and perceptions. So
Yeah. No, that's so funny. And we talked about that too, is like, yeah, we all, so many of the people that we talk about and talk with on this podcast went to UNT. And I think there's some like messaging around that, and people take meaning from that in different ways. But I think we each came out of it with different things. And that's why I like talking with Christy so much on this, is because we have different perspectives of ways we engage. And she's the person who I call after a session because she can give me different perspectives and insights, even though we went to the same place where we learned and we were supervised by the same people. We're all different, even though we all kind of perhaps came to the same professional belief system as to what we do and how we work with kids. Some our perspectives are different, and how we got here was different.
yeah, it's not as cult-like as I think people perceive it to be, right? Like
Right.
it's very much, again, if you operate from UPR and empathic understanding, you're encouraging people to think differently and work differently. I think from the outside it can look different, but yeah, I think that's an important piece of CCPT is that when you come to your true authentic self, you're coming with your perspective, like your worldview is coming into it, and that's a huge strength that each play therapist has, and we want to capitalize on that. So I think UNT has been part of trying to nurture that, and that part, I think what we do, I think, which is how it's perceived, is what we do is instill a lot of passion. Because if you think about Gary, Sue, me, others at UNT, the passion, Peggy Ceballos, the passion for play therapy is just really strong, and it's contagious.
Yeah.
And so I think that part is true for most people who
Yeah.
come through or have come through
I think
in the last 30 years, probably.
I love it because it goes back to what we started talking about at the very beginning, right? Like our authentic selves really get to come in. We're not little robots of each other,
mm-mm.
right? And I think sometimes that's how people view CCPT, is that, you have to perform in this very certain way and you have to use this type of response. And, we're going to do that with every child. And I was like, no. Right. And I know I've had some passionate discussions with some of my peers around that, and just like understanding child-centered play therapy, because they'd be like, that's not what Gary would do. And I was like, well, I'm not Gary. Gary never wanted me to be him. I'm not male. I'm not from
That
this
was
country, like whatever. Like I have to show up. And so like, and my lenses show up too in these relationships of where I think I need to respond to in this moment. But
And I
it's
think when people say things that's not what Gary would do, or even I've heard people say things like that about me, that's not what Dee would do. I think I think that's people who really don't know us,
yeah,
right? Because when you're in a room with Gary, that isn't the message you get.
no,
You
yeah.
should do it this way. When he's teaching, he's pretty clear and concrete about what you should do. But when it comes to one-on-one, and it comes into, how you serve children uniquely, that's just part of the CCPT approach, is that you would do it authentically.
It's also interesting to me because that's often how we teach counseling techniques, like the first counseling class, right?
right.
Like you have to do it this way.
Mhm.
And not that I don't think I approach intro to play that way, but you do have to demonstrate these skills to me, that you understand, when to use them for the most part, right? Like we have some authenticity about which skill I'm going to use. But if I notice you never use this skill, we're going to have discussions of why this skill is not coming in or this. But then my goal is for you to think intentionally like, okay, why would this be the time to use this skill?
Yeah.
Like that, the more advanced part of being a therapist. And I think we do that when we get to advanced techniques, or we get when they're in practicum or clinical experience, getting them to find their voice in the room while also being intentional and rooted and grounded theoretically with experience. But
that's like one of the most poignant pieces I remember of our supervision, Dee. We were in group play and activity, and we were showing a video, and I think it had to do with toy with the guns or whatever. And you go, "Oh, Maggie, why, like, tell me about this limit. You seem like you're saying it, but you don't seem like you're like feeling it." And I said, "Well, they said in intro to play not to do that." And you go, and this is how I remember it. I don't know if this is how, but you go, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know your name was Gary." I it was like, I think people hear that in a certain way, but like, I remember just like tearing up and just crying, which was not unheard of with me in the dog program, because it gave me permission to be me. I remember that as a turning point for me of, oh, I get to own this, because if I'm doing what I think I'm supposed to do, I'm no longer being authentic. And that was just a poignant moment. But I think that's why so many people, UNT is a cult or whatever they want to think, is just that like I gravitate towards people from UNT because I know I can be me. Different experience when you're with people from UNT that you don't get in other spaces. And so I show up as me, which is a really nice and sometimes scary thing.
Yeah. And what we're all seeking is to have a space where we feel fully known and accepted.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you coming.
Yeah.
And giving us your time. I know you're very busy.
No, I'm excited that I was invited, and of course, just I would have done it. No, like even if it's on podcast, if it's like if y'all had said, "Hey, we just want to talk to you," I'd be like, "Okay."
I know we don't get to do it very much.
I know. And when we do, I love it when three of us do get together, because I'm like, oh, we have these like really interesting conversations. So yeah. So I'm yes, I feel honored to have been invited.
And thanks for coming. I appreciate it. I know Chrissy does too.
yes, very much. I don't know the word I'm looking for. Settling,
Yeah.
restorative. When I
Yeah.
get the
Oh, I love that.
time, with people who've had a big impact on my life, but also that I very much appreciate and wholeheartedly care about. So we appreciate you being here.
Thank you. I know we're all giving like our version of hugs and Taylor Swift hearts, because it's hard to express in words, I think, the impact that you've had on our lives. And I think that a lot of people feel that impact from you, from reading your books or hearing you speak. And we're really lucky to have gotten to not just have you as a supervisor and a teacher and a book writer, but also as a mentor and a friend. And so thank you for all that you do for the community and for us.
Thank you. Love you both.
Love you.